of us know people like this. They always seem to be going places, and they're really busy all the time, but they never seem to actually get anything quite done. Do you know people like this? Maybe you can jot down somebody you know like this at 3B. They always seem to be going, but you're always like, dude, when are you ever going to actually get anything accomplished? Maybe you know somebody like this. Maybe you are one of those people. You start lots and lots of projects, but you never actually complete very many of them. This is our guy, right? He knew of every judgment, case, and crime recorded ever since King William's time. He could dictate defenses or draft deeds. No one could pinch a comma from his screeds, and top of page 106. And he knew every statute off by rote. In other words, he's a lawyer that knows the law inside and out. He wore a homely party-colored coat, girt with a silken belt or pinstripe stuff. Of his appearance I have said enough. Interesting. Let's finish with this lawyer, sergeant of the law. He doesn't seem to care so much about his clothing and what he wears as about making money through the manipulation of the law. The fact that Chaucer hasn't said much about his appearance has led any number of readers to wonder whether Chaucer supports this guy and sees him as legitimate or not so legitimate. Let's keep going. There was a Franklin. Now, if you will read your footnote at line at number 46, all a Franklin is here is a wealthy landowner. This is going to be one of our major upper class people. So let's write that down. This is one of our major upper class people. All right. There was a Franklin with him, it appeared. Now this is interesting, this constant use of this, it appeared. In other words, it appeared that the lawyer and a really rich guy were kind of colleagues and together. Now let's point this out at 2B really quickly. In the general prologue, Chaucer is genius about putting certain people together. When we meet, for example, the partner and the sumner, we're going to see this. Birds of Charing Cross, he will say, of the same feather. That is to say, they hang out together. Sometimes you're going to have an individual like the Oxford cleric, the student, he prizes himself for being alone. He's not with anybody. Or, for example, when we meet the wife of Bath, she's kind of independent and alone. Other times we're going to meet these characters that kind of seem to go together in some way. And then Chaucer will find very interesting ways to sometimes, through Canterbury Tales, put others of these characters together. We will see this, for example, in the Wife of Bath's prologue, at the very end of the Wife of Bath's prologue, when the friar and the pardoner start to get in it a little bit as adversaries. Let's keep going. There was a Franklin with him, it appeared. White as a daisy petal was his beard, a sanguine man, high-colored and benign. Sanguine meaning he's a happy person. So let's write that down. Our Franklin is a happy person. Now, of course, in Chaucer's day, anyone reading this would say, well, of course he's happy. He's a millionaire, right? He's a millionaire. He owns land, so obviously he's happy. Let's keep going. He loved a morning sop of cake and wine. He lived for pleasure and had always done, for he was Epicurus's very son. Now, Epicurus is a famous Roman philosopher who is going to say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Okay? In other words, what are we going to say about this landowner right away? He is what we would call today a celebrity, right? He enjoys being wealthy. We think of the Kardashians and other people like them, don't we? They enjoy being wealthy. They enjoy being celebrities. The obvious question is, well, what do they do all day? What do you mean, what do they do all day? Dude, they have fun all day because they have enough money to have fun all day. You know, in others, this is kind of Chaucer's opinion of him as well. In whose opinion sensual delight was the one true felicity in sight. He has a lot of money, and he likes to hang out with lots and lots of people. Felicity sometimes here can be understood to mean, because he says sensual delight can mean sexual. It can also just mean that you make a lot of money and you like to spend a lot of money, having parties with lots of wealthy people that are there and that kind of thing. As noted by St. Julian was for his bounty, he made his household free to all the county. His bread, his ale were the finest of the fine, and no one had a better stock of wine. His house was never short of baked pies, of fish and flesh, and these and such supplies. It positively snowed with meat and drink, and all the dainties that a man could think. In other words, he has the best, the finest. Let's write it down this way. He has the finest of everything. He has the finest food, for example. He has the finest wine. He has the ability to buy anything he wants to make his life great. According to the seasons of the year, changes of dish were ordered to appear. He kept fat partridges in coops beyond, line 360. Many a bream and pike were in his pond. Woe to the cook whose sauces had no sting, or who was unprepared in anything. And in his hall, he has lots of servants, and he's accustomed to those servants doing exactly what he says. Let's go ahead and write it down really quickly. The observation is, if you have money, you have power. Let's put it in our notes. If you have money, you have power. You have the power to be able to do anything you want. You have the power to tell other people to do what you want them to do. In other words, he says about his cook and about his servants, they did exactly what I told them to do, or I'd get rid of them and get myself others. Of course, if you don't have a lot of money, you're kind of stuck, right, with going to the store and buying just the things you can afford. But if you own the entire store times 10, right? Imagine not just going, for example, to the mall to go shopping, but just walking into the mall and saying, everything in the mall I want, buy it all. You know what? Come to think of it, I'll just buy the mall too. For most of us, that's an unheard of imagining, right? I mean, we can't even imagine being that wealthy. That is to say, I go to the car lot, and instead of having to choose one of the trucks, I just say, you know what, put all 20 of them on the truck, big truck, and bring them out to my mansion. I think I'll have all 20 of them. You want all 20 of them? Yeah, all 20 of them. Just bring them out. I don't care. And the fact that you can do it and you never touch currency, you never touch money, you just say do it and let somebody else pay for it for you. Are there really people who live like that in the world? Well, yeah, and this is one of those examples of those kinds of people, right? In other words, he loves to have it. He loves to spend it. Can we say this in our notes? He loves to flaunt it. What does flaunt it mean? He likes to show off with his money, right? He likes to show off with it. He likes to prove to people, I got lots of money, and you know it, and I know that you know it. Power. Money is power, right? And in his hall a table stood arrayed, and ready all day long with places laid, at line 364. Now I should point out, for the time that Chaucer is writing this, right, a meal was a big dog deal for most people. I mean, if you got a couple of meals a day, you were doing pretty well with yourself. A lot of people just ate basically one meal a day, because that's all they could afford. We're told this guy, he has a table that he's just set all the time, ready. So any time that he and his pals want to eat, they'll just go in and eat, which would be in Chaucer's day proof, ample proof. This is going to be possibly the wealthiest person in the entourage. What he has is what most people aspire to, but will never even imagine possible, okay? That is to say, true wealth. You know, the kinds of people, for example, that say, hey, let's go shopping today. I'd like to go shopping in London, England. And so they walk out the back door, they get inside of their jet. Their Learjet flies them to London. They have a little shopping and a little meal, and by early in the next day, they're back home again. What? There are actually people who live that life. There are. Whoa, I wonder what that would be like. Most of us assume that would be good or bad. Happy or sad? Well, that's a no-brainer question. 2 thumbs way up. Whoa, wouldn't that be a fun gig? Notice Chaucer, as he introduces here our landowner, our Franklin, he says, yeah, this cat lived a really fine life. He had lots and lots of money, right? As justice at the sessions, none stood higher. He often had been member for the Shrier. Let's point it out. Because of his money, he has the power politically. In other words, he can enact laws which allow for him to be better suited, to be better taken care of. Now, a number of years ago, people started asking this question about the people who make laws in our country in Congress. And they ask a very simple question. How many of the people who work in Washington, D.C. and make the laws are millionaires? Now, that is a very interesting question. I challenge you to Google that question and see the answer to that question. If you go to Washington, D.C., and you work in D.C. making laws because you are a representative of the people, how many of those guys have at least $1 million in their bank account? And by the way, that's a pretty easy answer, because all those people have to disclose what their values are, what their money, what their actual value of money is. And guess what? By far and away, the majority of them, 2 things we should point out, went to really fine schools for college, and they all have money. Which begs then the obvious question. If they all are millionaires or close to it, that is to say they're wealthy people, then how can they represent Americans normal Americans. This is Chaucer's observation here. He's saying it kind of in a very clandestine way. This guy has been involved in politics for a long time because it suits him, it helps him in some way. Now, what happens often is that somebody will go to Washington who is not wealthy, but immediately is going to be approached by what are called lobbyists. People who have money, who will say, you don't have a lot of money, but I can change that for you. I'm going to put $100,000 in your bank account, and you're going to make sure that this law gets passed, or you support it. You got a problem with that. Ooh, this is a tough one. Because somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, $500,000 in his bank account, whoa. So he may not get elected the next go around, but 500 grand he can certainly use. So now it's like, ooh. See the tough one, right? Money and politics. Chaucer's bringing it up here. It can be a very dangerous combination. Sometimes we will have politicians who will stand up and actually say, money and politics, bad idea, should not go together. And they'll begin to actually suggest that there should be some separation of the two in some way. Here we're working. To finish. A dagger, we're told, line 367, a dagger, a little knife, and a little purse of silk hung at his girdle, white as morning milk. As sheriff, he checked, audited every entry. He was a model among landed gentry. Now, it's not clear, let's put this in our notes, it's not clear whether Chaucer is supportive of this guy or kind of ridiculing this guy. Maybe a little bit of both. He is certainly telling what we'll call the yokel reader, when the partner uses that term later. That is to say, the person from the lower class. He's definitely informing a person from the lower class. When you see a wealthy person, that wealthy person has money, but more particularly, that person has power. That person has power. You know, it's a simple question to ask, for example, in a high school. Two people get caught doing the same thing. One of them, the dad in the town, owns the largest factory and lives in a $10 million mansion on the hill, and the other kid barely has enough money to be able to afford a pair of shoes on the first day of school. Which one gets off when he goes to the school principal and it doesn't get punished very harshly? And which one gets jacked all the way? Well, a lot of my students will say, "Yeah, that's not even a question. We all know who gets the better job, because that kid's dad has power that the principal might be worried about." Now, this has been an ongoing debate even within high schools. Is it true you are your money? And is that fair or is that not fair, right? Notice we can't really totally make out whether Chaucer is saying it's unfair. He's certainly saying it's the way that it is. Okay, let's turn now quickly to our next group. Our next group, and it's only going to take a couple of seconds. I'm on page 106. Our next group, two things about them. One, we're going to call them the Guild Fraternity. Fraternity just means brotherhood, of group of men. Guild here simply means, well, it's like if you've watched, for example, a house being built. Yes? So the house is being built. It starts out with just a level piece of ground. First, we got to bring out the large earth mover machines, right, that are going to move the dirt around. You know what I'm talking about? They're going to dig a hole in the ground. They're going to do some stuff like that, right? Then we're going to bring out the people who are going to build the foundation of the house and are going to frame the house. Yes, right? Then we will bring out somebody who's going to do the roof of the house, somebody who's going to do the painting of the house, somebody who's going to lay the concrete. Let's point out, for most work sites, that is not one person. Would you agree with me? That is not one person. That is a group of people. So for example, when it's time for the electrical to be done, you don't ask the person laying the carpet to do that. You bring in what we call an electrician. That idea of the diversification of labor is something that's happening in England in the 14th century. And what you have is a group of people who will come together because then they can charge at job sites, they can charge more money and make sure everybody within the guild fraternity gets paid. Here, our guild fraternity is a haberdasher, a dyer, a carpenter, a weaver, a carpet maker. So you just want to list all of those guys, but you want to see them together. We are told they were among our ranks. All in the livery of one impressive, there it is, guild fraternity. Guild fraternity, there's your term, the very last word on page 106. I'm at the top of 107. They were so trim and fresh, Their gear would pass for new. Their knives were not tricked out with brass, but wrought with purest silver, which avouches a like display on girdles and on pouches. Each seemed a worthy burgess, fit to grace a guild hall with a seat upon the dais. Their wisdom would have justified a plan to make each one of them an alderman. They had the capital and revenue. Besides, their wives declared it was their due, and if they did not think so, then they ought. To be called madam is a glorious thought, and so is going to church and being seen having your mantle carried like a queen. Let's point out 2 observations about our guild fraternity. 1, because they got together as a group, they could demand more money. 2, the reason they wanted more money was because all of them were married, and their wives had all said, we want new clothes, and here is why. When we go to church on Sunday, we want people to look at us. We want to look good, and therefore we should have new clothes. To which, notice Chaucer says about women, they all like to dress nice, and they all like to be called madam. That is to say, to be considered part of the upper middle class. And so he says, these guys had figured it out. They knew how to come together and to make a pretty decent living that they could then give to their wives. Okay, we're going to pause there for just a second, come back, and we'll resume with the cook here in a bit. Thank you.